Denis Weil, welcome to Earthlings, welcome to Terrícoles.
Pleasure to be here.
Denis Weil is currently the Dean of the IIT Institute of Design in Chicago. For more than a dozen years, he has driven design and innovation in leadership positions at organizations such as McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, and IDEO. Most recently, Denis Weil has applied his design leadership to driving innovation into social and public sectors, serving as a design advisor to a range of social and civic organizations, including Bloomberg, Philanthropies, Europe, Mercy Corps, and Synergy. Recently, also, you spoke at the Barcelona Design Congress. Just to be clear, we're not talking, when we talk about design, we're not talking about cozy living rooms and chic lamps for modern offices. Design is a complete different thing that most of the people still understand, although you have been discussing this new concept of design for decades. We shouldn't say new, actually. Why does it happen?
I mean, design is a very inclusive term, and that's a little bit of the challenge, that everybody is a designer, because designing is changing the natural course, doing an intervention to do something that is better. So a very good new book by Jessica Helfland, who is a professor at Yale, wrote a book called The Invention of Desire last week. And she says that design is really defined as being a humanist discipline that is future-oriented. So humanist meaning it's about improving the human condition, and it's oriented towards the future, so kind of a change agenda. So even designing new furniture in the living room is a humanist, future-oriented discipline, because you hope people will get more pleasure or more comfort out of new furniture. But also solving social problem is a humanist, so social enterprise, social focus. So I think it's a question of scale, and it's a question of impact. So the design we do, it tends to be bigger scale, bigger impact, because we believe that that's what the world where design can help most, has the biggest deficit, that solving these complex challenges, we need the creativity, but it's also, the same design works at a much smaller scale and a much smaller impact, and it's still design.
Actually, during the Barcelona Design Congress, the main motto was transforming society. When you talk about all these things, the sensation is that you want to change the world, really. You have a visionary approach where the sky is the limit, but in a way, it's quite a huge challenge, I would say.
Yeah, our school, the Institute of Design, was founded 80 years ago by Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was from Germany, originally Hungarian, but was one of the key drivers of the Bauhaus. He was at the Bauhaus, joined the Bauhaus in 1923. So Bauhaus was founded by Gropius in 1919, but he was there for 6 years and drove the pedagogy. And then the Bauhaus closed in 1933 because it was degenerate art, and he came to Chicago in 1937, 80 years ago, and founded actually what he initially called the New Bauhaus.
Escaping from the Nazis.
Yeah. Yes. And he described that what the role of design is to further society's use to the maximum, to further the use of creative ability to the maximum for society's benefit. So that's really the call for design. So it's not that we think we are so good or so important that we need to transform the world. We feel, and I've alluded to, is that these complex global challenges we have today can benefit from that creativity. And not that the designers are necessarily the ones who bring the creativity, but designers are able to bring out the creativity to society's benefit. So there's a big thinking about the term design thinking, that design thinks different than business or than social science. And right now, a lot of these global complex challenges, being economic, being inequity, being sustainability, there are a lot of business people, a lot of social scientists, a lot of scientists working on it, but they use a very deductive approach. They kind of focus in on the problem, analytical approach. We believe that design, in combination with that, can add an additional dimension by being more divergent, more generative, more opening up the mind. And one of the things I talked about at the Barcelona Design Week and conference was this idea of living in the age of emergence, where those solutions to these complex challenges most likely have to come out in a self-organized way. We have to tap into the creativity of all the experts, all the scientists, all the citizens to actually then see a solution emerge. And I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about design and transforming society.
And since design has been talking about design thinking and influencing other disciplines like business, for example, you mentioned engineering. All these disciplines have incorporated design thinking. But what is actually the method? I know you cannot go through all the steps and all the information that probably you teach in Chicago, for example. But what would be the basics for understanding what design thinking means? I mean, how do we picture someone who uses design thinking? What's in the mindset?
How much time do we have?
Probably 20 minutes.
The way to think about this is that design has been around forever. The first designer was Bezalel, mentioned in the Bible, who designed the plate of the high priest in the temple. And he actually, it says in there that God gave him the tools and gave him the best craftsmen and the wisdom to choose them and to integrate it. Mm-hmm. So design has always been two things. It has been a practice very much linked to the crafts movement originally, which produced a product. But then when you looked at all the different craftspeople, if it was a carpenter or woodworker, if it was a graphic art designer, if it was a fashion designer today, they all have a different product. But if you actually looked at the process they used, goes a little bit back to the generative thinking, it was all actually very similar. And that was the recovery of design thinking, is that there is not just the product of design, there is also the process of design. And that's the idea of design thinking, is that that process, because it's humanistic and future-oriented, can actually be used in innovation and business. And the key aspect of this process is, first of all, being contextual. So really understanding first what is the context that product goes in. It's often described as human-centered design, so you're trying to understand both the user as well as the context they use it in. In design, in professional language, we call these use cases. So what is actually the use case of this glass? This is a blue glass. You probably wouldn't use this. This is kind of a party glass. That's why it's a blue color. So that's the use case. You wouldn't probably use this every day at breakfast or something. Depends on your design preference. So that's one part. The second part is this idea of prototyping, of actually not going right away to the finished product, but kind of trying things out and failing fast. So those are kind of the key contexts. So contextual, human-centered, and prototyping are the key parts. It's often also described as traditional problem solving, the analytical way of problem solving, and the way our society works, Western society works, is that the way we solve products is very linear. We don't like ambiguity. So we try, when we have a problem, business person very quickly for 5 minutes says, okay, what are all the different options? You kind of diverge a little bit, right. And then you spend the next 3 months converging. Yeah. Designers diverge much more, and actually converge multiple times. Much more comfortable with ambiguity, and through that can experiment and iterate, and therefore try many more things out. So that's really design thinking per se. It's this idea of being from the understanding unmet needs, meeting the needs of the user, making sure there's a need there, understanding the context so you can design for it, and failing fast and trying things and thinking broader and more generatively.
I understand it's also very horizontal, including people from different disciplines in the process. But in a way, when you say things like designers should unleash other creativities or facilitate other creativities, even giving up authorship, I think that's very revolutionary in a way, considering that people that go to university and invest money in having a design career may want to have some credit. I mean, how will we measure the success if these benefits are shared in a way? If in a way you share all the process with other people, you just act as a facilitator.
So, I mean, the traditional role and still the dominant role of design is the designer as maker or the designer as creator. That has been around forever and kind of in the modern way since the Bauhaus in 1919. The traditional designer as a maker works in a studio. A studio is a place you withdraw from the world and you go inside and you access your own creativity and you bring it out and you create this beautiful object or this object that has a lot of craft in it and works well, and you deliver it to the client. That is the predominant model. With design thinking and with kind of the whole movement towards innovation, really the second role of designer, kind of using the process for much bigger issues like what should we produce. So not what to produce, but what should we produce, not how to produce it. And that's really the designer as navigator. And that's kind of the design thinking movement where designers can help figuring out what does the user need, what does the world need, and very much initially was very much in the business context, what kind of new products. Because most companies became very, in the 90s and 2000, have optimized their mode and the means of production, but they really didn't know what to produce. So the how to produce they figured out. They didn't know what's the next product, what's the next wave. And now, obviously, we're in the middle of a digital transformation. The same question is asked, what is the right product? And that's kind of where the designer as navigator comes in. And that's really the phase we are in. So there's still a creation period. The creation tends to be at the back end of the process. You know what you want, you have the specs. Now a designer creates the form. This designer as navigator has moved designer more into the front end of the process to try to identify where is goodness, what actually is good, where are the opportunities. Let's define a line of sight and where we think the opportunity is and then figure out how to get there. So we're kind of at the peak of this, and design thinking, I think, is peaking right now. And what we see is that there is a lot of great ideas out there and very innovative ideas. So design thinking has worked, and we have now engineers who learn design thinking. Most engineering schools around the world, around the West, most business schools teach design thinking, and it has really kind of unlocked and added an additional lens to very analytical business and engineer thinking, and now they can use it in addition. They're still probably grounded in analytics, but have that additional tool. I think where we are now is that we see that it's not sufficient to just come up. So we started with a product, the product wasn't sufficient, we needed to go to the front end to figure out what do we produce. And now we're figuring out, so we went from design making to design thinking, and now we realize that we have all these wonderful on paper ideas and visions, but organizations have a hard time in implementing them. And now we think designers need to move in design doing. So how actually do we do those products of design thinking? How do we actually bring them into the world? And that is where we are now. And we're trying to figure out how designers can do that. And that's where the role shifts. The role shifts into designers now being more integrators, working with cross-functional teams, and try to help get these ideas, sell these ideas, becoming advocates of the idea, but also figure out how to integrate it from a business point of view, from a manufacturing point of view, from an engineering point of view, and build support within an organization to actually make the change. Every design change, every transformation, as you know, brings destruction. I mean, it's Schumpeter creative destruction. Whenever you go through change, there is a destruction. And creativity requires creative destruction. That involves loss from some stakeholders. So partially the reason why these design thinking ideas don't get implemented, I think there are estimates that 70 to 80% of them don't, is because there is opposition. People will have to change roles, they might lose some power, they might lose some money. So now suddenly, if you really want to get this through, you, as a designer, unlike a business person, you don't have the resources reporting it to you. Traditionally, you're not the general manager. So you have to use different leadership skills. And I think that's where the facility comes from.
Since you mentioned that, and considering you were named Master of Design by Fast Company for your work at McDonald's, engaging with large-scale experimentation, you must have had a lot of power. I mean, given the fact that there may be a possibility of loss, a huge loss for a corporation like that, which is everywhere in the world, and you took to a new level.
Right. So actually, there's two types of leaderships. There's formal and there is informal leadership. So formal leadership is through organizational structures, and people report into you, and it's a more traditional hierarchical leadership. And that's the one where the power is kind of in the structure. And then it is informal leadership, which is the one we are talking about. And actually, McDonald's is misleading in the sense that obviously it's a system, a network, but the power is not at the center. So I was at the corporate center, I was global head of design, but really that's a corporate role. So the power is actually in each country. So the way I was having to influence was actually more through a style of orchestration, a style of being a facilitator, of a style of bringing the future to the front line and kind of getting them ready, having solutions for them when they needed it. But there was no dictum. And I think that's actually a more modern way of leading. I think it's not just in design, everything. That's what's happening in network-based organizations, where it's thought leadership and then facilitation that allows you to get things through. I was just, before I left Chicago, I was at an event, panel discussion that Gensler, the biggest architecture firm, had on urban design and design of experience in cities. And they had the city planner from Detroit, and they had Theaster Gates, who is a contemporary artist who works on the south side of Chicago in economic redevelopment. And they both said something very, very interesting, which goes to this network power. They said that protest in the past and community organizers in the past process was about saying no. We don't want this that you want to do in this neighborhood. And that has never gone very far, because frankly you don't get power that way. You obstruct. The new way that they are doing and have much more success with is actually to channel project into a generative way and doing community organizing to build something, and actually from the bottom up, rather than being against policy that comes top down.
Because they feel involved. Basically.
Yes, they feel involved, and they feel actually it's more constructive and more empowered and more collaborative.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of leadership that we are talking about, and I think where the world is moving to is trying to being for something and start collaboratively to build it, because it's just policy without actually trying things out. It's too complex nowadays. I'm glad I'm not a parliamentarian. I think doing policy is very, very hard these days.
That's what I was going to say, because we have examples here in Barcelona, for example, when talking about living labs. There have been some projects that have been very criticized because they have been implemented the same way that living labs are implemented, incorporating some things at some point and then correcting what worked and what didn't work. But there is a huge political pressure, even some instrumentalization. People may complain because they don't see the results. What is the turning point that allows a project to go through or fail in between because it didn't have enough time to show people what the real outcome and benefit for them is?
Yeah, so that's actually, no, that's a very good point. And actually I used to, when I was at McDonald's still, it was easier because it was it was a network, this idea of backcasting. So we used both the idea of transformational change, and call it a line of sight. Here is 5 years, 6 years out where we want to be. And it's not specific, but it's roughly we need to be, like the new CEO of McDonald's calls it, to be a progressive modern burger company. That's a line of sight. And then you backcast it to where we are today. So if we want to be this in 5 years, what are the incremental steps we need to do in order to get there? So it's revolution through evolution. So you have a revolutionary goal, but you're getting there through evolution, which has less destruction, and therefore it's easier to implement. I've heard it now taken one step further, both through some courses I took in Boston and this city planner from Detroit, who says that so nowadays you use the word moonshot for the line of sight, so that's the moonshot. But they have a moonshot, but they don't talk about it. They actually start with very tangible results. So the most important thing is to first show tangible result. Or the way a professor of mine at Harvard, Abdul Hamdi from Oxford University says, who's been in international development, he said that every action he does in international development has is mostly tactical, but also has a strategic component. But it always starts with a tactical thing, knowing that this allows us to learn if this is the right strategic direction, but it's tangible and tactable and community involvement. So my question is on these living labs, which I read about in Barcelona, because Barcelona was leading, one of the pioneers in it, were they too strategic and not tangible enough? And were they scaled too big instead of actually really showing something changes on the ground? Mm-hmm. The key challenge, I don't know if that's the case in Barcelona, one of the key challenges in underrepresented and poor communities is that they are tired of having people come in and talk to them and research
visionary dreams
and nothing changes.
Yeah.
So they actually don't even want to talk to you anymore, because rightfully so, because
it actually becomes worse than
yes,
the original purpose.
Correct. So I think there is a huge truth there, and I think it's again this role of integrator, which is one we have to define. But to a certain extent, if we really believe that the shift of community action shifts from organizing protest to say no to organizing action to build, we need new types of community organizers. And I wonder, my deepest kind of dream is that perhaps designers can be those new community organizers, because the community organizers of the past, who tended to be mostly social scientists, were focused on kind of rallying a movement to kind of on a policy level, very theoretical. And I think if you're talking about generative and building, perhaps it's more somebody who has generative and creative abilities who can organize that movement and deliver on it. So that's kind of one hypothesis that I would love to try out. So.
Let's talk about social design, because I'm surprised that you came from McDonald's to projects that include, for example, improving sanitation, public sanitation in Kenya, or public libraries in Chicago. What happened in between? What made you take that decision? I mean, it's quite a different job, I may say.
So personally, I'll give you a personal answer. So personally, I'm addicted to scale and I'm addicted to complexity. Mm-hmm. So those are my two passion points. And McDonald's had met both. I was able to make that small improvements. I impacted 70 million customers a day, so that gives you the scale.
Quite a few.
And then the complexity with 190 countries is quite complex. But the kind of design I kind of was part of to bring to life is this idea of service design of services, which really started in the early 2003, and I was part of the original movement, and I started teaching as an adjunct faculty, as a docent. And the next level of complexity of service design is social design, because in service design you go within an organization that has a service, so it's not a product like a restaurant, like banks. Yeah. And social is kind of the next level of complexity, because now you have multiple stakeholders, you have government, you have policy. So I was very interested in that. And then the second thing is really the impact aspect. And one of the pioneering aspect of social design, or the challenge in the social sector, is actually impact. So there has not been hardly any organizations that really have scaled in the social sector. Scale in the social sector is you develop in a direct service model. You develop a model, you provide good work, good service, and then you just do more of it. So if you use the example of Year Up, which is the workforce development organization I worked for, they developed the best training model for 18 to 24-year-old opportunity youth. So these are youth 18 to 24 years old who are neither at work nor studying, nor at school.
That's why you talk about systems and not products.
Yes, correct. And so they had a training program of 6 months, an internship, and they had a 70% success rate. Developed it 15 years ago, have randomized controlled trial, have evidence that it works, the best model, compared to kind of trade colleges, community colleges, as they call it in the US, which have about a 20% graduation rate, so they don't even get a job. So 4 times better. They, after 15 years, can serve 3,500 students a year. There are 5.8 million who need it. So if you look at McDonald's, if you were a burger company, after 15 years, you would only have a market share of 0.00 or whatever it is %. You would say that you failed. I mean, you haven't scaled. So I think what attracted me to the social sector, and from a personal impact point of view, is that there is this opportunity for designers to figure out how to bring scale to that sector.
But you need also huge funds. I mean, McDonald's has huge funds to engage in a huge transformation. But for social organizations, where the money comes from? I mean, somebody has to pay you, for example.
Yes, but I mean, the overwhelming majority of social organizations have a revenue. I mean, they also get fee for services. Okay. So yes, there's a philanthropic component to it. But I think that's part of also thinking about the business model. So one of the challenges in the social sector is that most services are over-designed because, again, there wasn't an impact focus, there was a doing good work focus. The focus was on giving the best possible to the beneficiary, not actually solving the problem. So if you shift to a system change focus, so instead of kind of providing good services, to change the system to solve the problem, there are many other levers available. You can get into policy. You can actually influence government to persuade to have better policies which fund these programs. But you also will make the programs much more efficient. You'll find partnerships. I mean, the growth of PPPs, public and private partnership, is a good model on where it is actually figured out that we can scale more efficiently. The firm being for-profit and non-profit is the best organization, societal organization for efficiency, an enterprise. So it doesn't matter if it's for-profit or non-profit. And government is the best kind of policy environment. So if you let everybody do their strength, every structure that we have developed in society do their strengths, you get to more scale versus doing everything yourself. So the connection really was this scale, the opportunity to have impact, and then lastly, I'm in my 50s. When you get the 50s, you're willing to trade kind of money for personal impact, and that was probably the other personal motivation. Fair
enough. What do you think of Barcelona? Barcelona, people like to think of themselves as the capital, or one of the capitals of design. I mean, but considering we're talking about a different approach of design compared to the one people have in mind normally, do you think we're up to the job? I mean, do you think Barcelona is a reference? You've been here 3 times, I understand.
Yes.
How do you see the environment in terms of design and all this that we're talking about in Barcelona?
So, I mean, I don't know it well enough to really judge. I think that obviously Barcelona is very well known from a design as form-giving and creator, and obviously its beauty is well known and its appreciation for it. I think I know that on the European level, particularly about living labs and the whole social design, Barcelona was, I forgot who was leading it, but it was also on the leading front. So I think it's, Europe in general is actually ahead on social design over the US. Where it has come out. And I think, interestingly, it seems to be a more natural continuum in Europe than in the US, where it's kind of being categorized into different categories. The interesting thing is that you know that the Institute of Design was in 1955 really started. Initially, it was founded by the Bauhaus, which was still this idea of master and apprentice, so still very much an art school model. But in 55, when Jay Dublin, who became director, and said the model is no more art school, the model is professional schools like law and medicine, it really shifted to becoming more theory, critique, and methods oriented. And we have been doing that since the 50s. In Europe, most design schools still have that arts background and had it. And it's interesting that it actually, I think what happened in the area of social design is that these arts-driven universities actually leaped over us as it relates to kind of embracing the social responsibility of designers, because we always felt we are human-centered design, we are really not designing by our own vision, we're designing by the context and what we see, and we didn't realize that we still had a lot of power, that we really didn't biases, that we really weren't aware of it. Because the arts in Europe, design coming out of the arts field, has make a much better way of understanding that one of the things you have to give up if you want to get to that impact of social design is being very conscious of both your own bias, but also being conscious of the power, and that goes back to the living lab and then facilitators. So to a certain extent it's more, and it still has the arts things also still very strong in Europe. It's less of a dichotomy, it's not like 2 camps, it's really more of a continuum, which I'm a little bit jealous of. I think it's actually a more natural role of design.
Denis Weil, we have to stop it here. Thank you very much for being with us, and welcome back anytime you want.
It was a pleasure, and it was very exciting to be here for Barcelona Design Week.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.